To just get started quickly, and as Vibhor mentioned, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A part. And Vibhor and Jitu, maybe you can just man it and stop me when we need to take some questions. Sure. Are you all able to see my screen?
Okay.
Okay. So I think for most of you here, I think you know who we are and what we do, but just as an introduction to those who may not have that context, we are eGov Foundation. We are based out of Bangalore, and we build the Digit platform, which is an open source platform for service delivery. Digit is a digital public good, and we work with governments, societal organizations, markets to drive population scale digital transformations. We work towards accelerating SDGs. We primarily work in 4 areas, which is urban, health, public finance management, and sanitation. And if you've been following the G20 summit and all the happenings around it, you know that DPIs are becoming, digital public infrastructure is one of the most important outcomes of G20 and the importance that it is being given across the global south. So what we do is extremely relevant to millions of citizens across the world. So primarily our focus SDGs are these 6: sustainable cities and communities, which is where eGov kind of started in the urban area. We've got innovation, infrastructure and industry, clean water and sanitation, peace, justice and strong institutions, good health and well-being. This is one of our focus areas. Our health mission is going live in Africa this year. And this is one of the primary areas of focus for eGov this year. And we work with partners to achieve all these goals. So we build digital public goods, digital public infrastructure. We also work towards enhancing state capacity and partner capacity. And we also try and catalyze market ecosystems by providing a common platform for innovation. And on the right here, if you can see my screen, let me switch to my pointer. Okay, you can see my pointer now. So right here, you can see, all the different sectors that we are in, some statistics, how many countries, how many citizens we serve, etc. Okay, so getting to the agenda of the webinar, we are going to give you a brief overview of the Digit platform and the tech behind it. Again, I'll not go too deep into this because we only have 1 hour, and I quickly want to get into the aspects of design. And I'm sure that all of you who are familiar with Digit will already know a lot of this. If not, we'll share with you some resources that you can look through to learn about us. Then we are just going to talk about details about what to think about when you're designing a Digit service. And I'll leave you with some reference and reading material. We'll share the slide deck with you maybe after the call, and then we'll throw it open for Q&A. And as Vibhor mentioned, please keep the questions coming. We'll take a pause in between at the midway mark and maybe answer some questions and then move on. So the Digit platform overview, we are building a DPI, like I said, and these are some of the platform principles that we follow. And this we follow even when designing a Digit service. So we are interoperable. We try to keep things very minimalistic and clean. That makes it much more easily understandable. We are scalable because we are a microservices architecture. We can scale pieces independently. That makes for cost-effective deployments and operations. We are unbundled, which is that we have broken down a lot of the domain services into fundamental building blocks, which can then be composed into applications across different domains. We are open and standards driven. All the tech that we use is open source. It's freely available, lots of documentation around it. We are secure and reliable. We've got security and privacy built into the platform. Certain features are there which enable this. We are easy to use, which means, we ensure ease of deployment, development, and operations. We've got a lot of guides and tutorials and plenty of videos on YouTube and on our website that will help you understand Digit and use the platform. We are inclusive. What this means is the platform is cloud agnostic. You can deploy Digit across commercial providers as well as private clouds or on premises. We provide localization language support, so you can configure Digit in any of the regional languages, whichever one is most convenient to you. And we try to make sure that the design, the API specs we put out are generic, we use standards, and thus we ensure inclusion. Now, this is briefly the tech stack. What we build, we are primarily based on Java Spring Boot for our microservices. We also use React and Flutter for the UI. At the bottommost infra layer, we use Postgres for our database. We use Elasticsearch for analytics. And, we use Kafka, Jenkins, Helm, Kubernetes, Postman to test our APIs. We use Netflix Zool, which is again open source, as our API gateway. For the observability stack, we use Prometheus and Grafana and Kibana. So you can just have a look at this. This is again information that's freely available on the website as well. So Digit is a microservices architecture, and briefly, this is kind of like the architecture diagram of Digit. You may have seen this elsewhere before, so I'm not going to go into depth on this. Basically, we've got 30 to 40 complementary services which form the core Digit platform, which is what I'm showing you. These are not the domain platforms. These are not urban or sanitation or public finance management. This is very specifically the core Digit platform, which has all these independent microservices, which can be used, and these are being used across missions, to build the mission-specific platforms. These services are composed, and kind of the other platforms are built on top of this. Broadly, that's the view. So we've got the relational database, we've got an analytical database, and we've also got what we call as accelerators that help you build the citizen portals, the employee portals, and the administrator dashboards. We'll come back to the slide if anybody has questions later, but I'm going to move on for now from this. Okay, so designing on Digit. What do we do first? What is the first step that we take when we try to design a new service or a new domain on top of Digit? So I mentioned that we are a microservices architecture. Microservices, as most of you will know, you think about it as a software architectural pattern, right? You have monoliths, you have microservices, you have so many other ways of building these software systems, and these have evolved over decades now. But microservices are also about people, teams, organizational behavior, business functions, and delivering value to your end users or customers. What does this mean, right? If you study the history of microservices, and again, this is nothing to do with Digit as such, you will find plenty of talks on YouTube and elsewhere where industry leaders have spoken about the evolution of microservices, how we moved away from monolithic architectures to microservice architectures. And there are interesting stories about how this thing came about. But basically, one of the stories is about Amazon and how they kind of pioneered this whole microservice concept and how they moved to it. Basically, it's about team organization. It's about being agile, being able to deliver value to customers and end users without having too many tight couplings or dependencies. If I want to do X, but I have, 3 things that I have to do before I can do X, and then these 3 things are dependent on some other team to do something, right? And then I am tied down by their service delivery timelines, what their project management timeline is, developer timelines are, etc., etc. To kind of break out of this tight coupling, microservices came about, where each service kind of just delivers end-to-end value, including the UI, the business logic, and everything that goes into building a feature for a customer. So instead of saying organizing teams around UI teams, database teams, backend teams, etc., microservices is like a self-contained team structure where whatever is required to deliver some functionality is all available within the team itself. So it's more about, how teams are organized. How can you be agile? How can you deliver business value? And like I said, you can, listen to Martin Fowler, Kent Beck, and so many other people talk about microservices, and their presentations are a lot better than mine is. So please do watch them when you get the time, if you're curious about this. So that's one aspect of it. What that forces you to do when you start thinking about it in terms of teams and business value and features and stuff, you also start thinking about clean service boundaries. You start thinking about, what is the one thing that my microservice can do? What does it do well? There is only typically one thing that a service is supposed to do. For example, maybe it manages accounts, or maybe it's about the shopping cart, or it's about managing payments, right? So all of these can be separate microservices in a organization. Basically, this means you are defining your service boundaries very cleanly, doing only one thing, and you are keeping the services loosely coupled. When you build these microservices, they have to interact necessarily with all the other pieces in the organization, and that's how you're going to build a functional product, right? But they are loosely coupled, and they've got high functional cohesion. When they work well together, they bring about cohesion, and you see a complete product. They've got well-defined APIs for communication. This means you should focus on your API specs and do API-driven development. So one of the first things that you should do when you're trying to build a service for a new domain, or you're just creating a new service, is domain modeling. This is, again, nothing to do specifically with eGov or Digit. I'm just trying to present this to set the context. So domain modeling, you'll have to understand your domain and your business requirements first. This means that architects typically work with, domain experts, with the product managers or business analysts to kind of understand, what the domain is, what does it do, what are the requirements, what problems are we trying to solve. And once you have that clarity of, what is the domain, what are we trying to do, a microservice should ideally abstract away all the details of what we are trying to do, right? And we should not present complexity in the endpoints. That should be taken care of inside in the business logic. So we encapsulate the complexity, and we present a very simple interface to the user to do something. This is like akin to driving a car. A car is a very complicated piece of machinery, has a lot of moving parts inside, does a bunch of things, but you don't need to know all that to drive a car, right? You have certain interfaces, your steering wheel, your clutch, your brake, your accelerator, and your gear, and you basically just need to know how to operate these things in order to move your car from point A to point B. So you can think of microservices as a very similar thing. You have APIs which tell other pieces how to interact with you, and the microservice itself kind of hides all the details from the end users. The other thing with domain modeling is get your service boundaries right. Identify, what are your microservices, what are your boundaries, and then create simple maintainable APIs. Largely, these are the 4 things that you need to think about. And we'll talk about some of this in detail, and I'll also try to show you a couple of examples of how we think about some of this. So we follow this thing called domain-driven design. Again, domain-driven design is a framework that helps you design microservices. It comes with a bunch of strategies and patterns that can get you to a fairly well-designed microservice framework. And this was pioneered by Eric Evans. You can look him up online. He has written a book about domain-driven design. And there is also another author called Vince, I think, Vaughn. And he has also written about how to implement domain-driven design in any given domain or enterprise. So we try to follow this broadly. Of course, we don't follow it to a T, but broadly, this is a good practice when you're trying to design microservices. So domain-driven design has 2 portions to it. There is a strategic portion and there is a tactical portion. So strategically, you will just define the large-scale structure of the system or the domain that you're trying to model. And during this phase, you want to focus on the business capabilities and what kind of function you're trying to deliver to your customer or partner, right? And once this is kind of like the high-level design. And once you know broadly what you're doing, then you can get into the tactical design. Here you have a lot of design patterns, which allows you to model entities, aggregates, domain services, etc., etc. Again, this is something very common, and you can please feel free to Google it and look through it and understand. So this broadly gives you a good context on how to design a microservice. So this is kind of like a mind map that I drew. So one of the things that we are working on is Works platform that is geared towards, building these big public works projects, right? The kind that PWD would do. But also one of the things that we are doing in Odisha is the Mukta scheme. Mukta stands for Mukhyamantri Karma Tatpara Abhiyan. And this is a scheme that the Odisha government rolled out to make sure that daily wage seekers have some form of income, especially during the COVID period. I think this came about during the COVID period when people were out of work and they were struggling. And the Odisha state government rolled out this scheme to make sure that there is some employment for daily wage seekers and they can earn income out of some projects that the state government can define. Okay. So if you look at how to think about the strategic design of this domain, right, what we are talking about, primarily our goal is to make sure, the daily wage seeker is going to benefit. And we are going to make sure that he or she is going to gain some daily income from what we are doing. So that's why that's at the center of this picture. Now, if you think about the details, how do we do this? How do we ensure that a wage seeker gets payment, right? We talk about, we have to first register the beneficiary or the wage seeker. And, we have to make sure we capture their bank accounts. And then we have to make sure that they've got certain projects that they can work on, which will eventually yield some income to them, right? So it's the government's job to define these projects, arrive at these projects that they can work on. And each of these projects has to have certain estimates. Again, if you take the civil or the construction analogy, if you're building a house, that's your project, and you will come up with an estimate for building your house, and you'll break it down, right, into details. How will you build your house? How many kgs of cement do you need? How many laborers do you need? Interior decorators, architects, things like that, right? So you basically come up with some kind of an estimate for a project. And then when your estimate is approved, you basically come up with contracts or work orders, which is given to a specific vendor. These guys go off, do the work, and they also track the work progress, how much has been completed. And finally, the contractors generate bills, right? This includes wage bills, material bills or purchase bills, and other kinds of bills as well. And finally, these bills go to payment. And when we try to pay the wage seeker, we are going to make sure their attendance is captured, because the Mukta scheme is based on attendance. If you have attended some project site work on some days, then you are given a daily wage for it, depending on number of hours you have worked. So we have work that is being completed by the wage seekers. We are also tracking their attendance. And finally, we are going to make payments to these wage seekers based on attendance and work completion, right? So you can see this is just a rough mental map that I drew. This is not a very exhaustive analysis of the domain. But this gives you an idea when you're getting started with a new domain or a new service, you can start to think about it in this way. This is one way to do this. So you can see all these connecting, lines between all these different things, right? So you've got all these various functions that need to happen in order to execute this scheme and make sure wage seekers have income. Now, from this, you can start moving into some of the tactical design part. This is like a high-level diagram, which gives you the big pieces. What are the big pieces? From this, you can start deriving what are my microservices. How do I think about these microservices, right? So this is the second part. So I'll just show you basically what I showed you in the previous diagram. You can start breaking it up into, these bounded contexts, what is called bounded contexts in domain-driven design. Basically, in domain-driven design, you don't think about an entity the same way throughout a large domain. For example, if I'm thinking about contracts, a contract has a lot of details. Who is the person it's assigned to? It's a legal agreement. It has, start and end dates, validity periods, uh, and completion clauses, milestones, so many other details are there in a contract. So when I'm thinking about it in this particular context of managing a works project, I need to think about all these details, right? Without these details, a contract service will be completely useless. But when I'm thinking about a contract in terms of bills or payments, right, I don't need to know all the details. All I need to know is, this bill has been generated from a contract. Is this bill valid? Can I pay this guy? That's it. So basically, how you think about contracts in the payment and billing area is very different from how you'll think about contracts in the works management area. So these are called the lines in blue that I have written, right? The text in blue is basically your bounded context or subdomains within your larger domain. So if Mukta is your domain, then these are all subdomains. And the way to split these subdomains is if you are thinking about certain entities together as a cohesive group, then all those entities become, like in one section or one subdomain of your larger domain. So for example, the works management, right? This has projects, contracts, estimates, and many other things also. But broadly, in this domain, I'll think about all these entities in the same way. Okay. Projects are connected to estimates, estimates are connected to contracts. And, I have to deal with the details of all these entities, but when they are talking to each other, because that's how this area works. Now, when I'm coming into the billing and payment subdomain, I don't care about all these details. All I care about is, which contract has generated what bill, is this payable? Can I go ahead and make a payment? And once I make a payment, I'll have to make the payment through some payment provider, right? And these can be third parties, either through a bank or a treasury system or whatever it is. So this is a separate domain again. The third party system I'm isolating into a separate domain. Billing and payment is a domain. You've got works management, which is a domain. You've got beneficiary management because you have to do some work to, register wage seekers who are the beneficiaries of this scheme. You have to make sure you gather their information and you have to be able to track their attendance. These are all separate, again, subdomains within the larger domain. Basically, this exercise, this dotted line boundary that I have drawn is from the previous diagram where you had this kind of a high level design. You are now getting into more tactical design and trying to figure out what are all the microservices that I need to build, what are all the boundaries between these various services. Okay. Again, this is a domain-driven design concept. This is just an illustration I've done. So you can look this up online. And keep in mind that, subdomains are not set in stone. Service boundaries are not set in stone. You may opt for a very macro kind of subdomain and then later realize you'll have to break it up further, right? Because it makes sense to do so because these pieces will be reusable elsewhere in some other domain, things like that. So works management, you can think of as a big domain, and you can see that I've broken it up into 3 different services: projects, contracts, estimates. There can be more also. So basically, this just gives you a framework for setting up your API service boundaries and figuring out what are all the different services you are going to have to build and how their APIs are going to look like. So this is broadly what tactical design can look like. And from this diagram, you can essentially start identifying your microservices that you need to build. You can start identifying what we call as registries in Digit. A registry in Digit is basically a repository of data that has been validated. It is trustworthy data that can be shared across contexts, across domains. And this brings down the cost of, operations between various units, and it increases trust in the system. If I have built a property registry, and now this property registry can be used by trade licenses or fire NOC approvals, building plan approvals, etc., or by the water connection department, then they can just use the property registry and start giving out water connections instead of building a separate registry for water connections specifically, right? So registries are a very important part of what we do with the Digit platform. So you can start identifying some of those building blocks. What are the registries you want to derive out of this domain? What are the services or the microservices that you need to build? And finally, what is like the master data that you need to arrive at for your service? So broadly, I've shown you like a lot of different services. Now we'll just pick up one service and I'll try to show you how we have done the API spec for it, how we have done the workflow for it, and how master data looks for it. Okay. So this is the next section of the talk where we are getting down into details of registries, master data, services, etc. So one of the first things that you want.
So Bhashini, before you move forward, you would like to look at the couple of questions in Q&A tab, and then Jugal has asked in the chat that can we have access to this DWS backend and front-end repository?
What is DWS? Front and backend. I'm not sure. What is DWS again?
I don't think I would find that. Let me just ask.
Sure. Yeah. Is Digit Security certified like OWASP? No, this is not something that we have done across. It's a work in progress. We've had certain certifications done for certain implementations, I think. But I don't think we have this overall at a platform level. Satish, if you are there, then please can you add to this?
No, we have done multiple rounds of Digit certification, which includes OWASP principles as well, but that was on the particular versions. We'll be doing this periodically, so almost in a year or like alternative years. So far 2.8 we have certified on security principles on the OWASP guidelines.
And Subhash, I think Jugal was referring DWS as the project that you were talking about.
DWSs.
I think he's interested in getting access to repository of the front end and back end of the same project that you were just describing it earlier, the Mukta project.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That we'll share.
That is there in the details in the works.digit.org.
Yeah, works.digit.org has all the details. The repositories are linked. These are open source repos in GitHub. So you can please have a look at this. And I'll also show you as we go along. Okay. What technology is used to communicate between different microservices? So we use REST APIs and we use JSON as the format to exchange data. Of course, you can use other things as well, but Digit uses this. Okay. So I'll continue now. So basically the first thing to do is to identify the registries and services based on your domain understanding. Like I said, what data can be shared across domains, these become registries. And you should think about building these registries when you build a platform, because then, that can be reused and that will add more value to the government. Instead of working in silos, these registries should be shareable across domains, across departments, and that's how we bring value to the government and the citizen. Like I said, identify the microservices that you need to build based on bounded contexts. This will keep evolving, and this is the hardest part of designing a microservices system, right? Basically identifying what needs to be built, how the interface needs to look like. And this is where most of the time needs to be spent, because once this is clear, building a service on Digit or any other microservice is not that complicated. The tech is the easiest part of it. Again, and Vibhor, if you could go on mute, please.
Sorry.
Yeah, and one more exercise that you need to do when you're building on top of Digit is, you need to think about, are there any existing Digit services that can be reused for what you're doing, or can they be enhanced? So as an example, I said that in the core platform, we've got a PDF service. We've got a report service. There are other services as well, like location and a boundary service, etc., etc. So if you're looking at something that needs to be built, there is a good chance that some of these services may already exist in the Digit platform. So please go through core.digit.org and see if there is any existing service that can be reused. For example, there is a SMS service, notification, billing, payment. These are all things that we have solved. And these are configuration based. So all you need to do is call into that service, configure it appropriately, and you should be able to use it in your new platform or domain. So check and make sure that what you're trying to design doesn't already exist, and only then start to think about building it. In some cases where you may have certain core digit services which do not fit your particular use case, then maybe that needs to be enhanced. If it's anything to do with the core platform, feel free to please raise a query in the discussion board and that can be taken up. Feel free to please propose a solution also, and we are happy to accept volunteer contributions and get a discussion going about that. So once this is done, then we start talking about, now you know what you're going to build. Now we need to understand the process flow or the workflow for that particular domain, right? Or that service. Now, almost all the government functions follow a certain procedure. They have a certain workflow or a process flow, right? And this is typically, you will get this information from your business analyst or your product owner in conjunction with your domain expert. This is basically a model of what really happens in the physical world. How does something go from point A to point B? What are all the different stages in the process before something is delivered, right? So you'll have to model the process flow, and this we do through swim lane diagrams. That gives you a good idea of who are the actors in the system, what are the different actions that they take, what are the different stages in the system, right? And what are the different actions that are possible at each stage. If you have an idea of this, then it's very easy to derive a workflow configuration JSON, which you can use to configure workflow in Digit. Details about how to do workflow, what it does, etc., that will be taken up in a different session, but broadly, you know what workflows are. So you can derive the configuration for it based on the process flow. I'll show you an example of a process flow right now. You can still see my screen, I think, right? Vibhor, you can see it, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this is a flow diagram that was developed for the Works platform, which I was just talking to you about. So you can see for the estimate service, I showed you one estimate service. So how does the flow look for that particular service is what this diagram is trying to model. I'll just zoom in a little bit. So you can see that, a field engineer typically prepares an estimate for a Works project. Okay. They come up with, components that are required for a particular work to be completed. This is what we call as an estimate. Once they come up, like they'll say, okay, I need 10 kg cement, I need 20,000 bricks, I need this much labor, I need this many pipes, whatever it is. So basically it's the breakup of the project into components. Once the field engineer identifies these components, he or she can submit this proposal, this estimate proposal, and it goes through what is called a technical sanction. This is done by a municipal engineer who will look through, what has been proposed and say, okay, this is doable, we want to do this. Now, once this approval happens, the next stage is the municipal commissioner or the executive officer will do a check on the estimate, make sure it's correct, whether they can execute on it within the given, time period or financial year or whatever it is. And once they approve it, then it goes for final admin approval, which is done by a chairman or somebody. And once they approve the estimate, right, then it moves on to the next level, which is basically going for tendering or issuance of a contract or a work order. That we'll not go into. But this is just inside the estimate service itself. There is a process flow before a complete approved estimate comes out of the system. So this is the model of that process workflow. This was put together by the platform product manager for Works, right? In conjunction with domain experts. Now that we know that this is what needs to be modeled, you can now come up with the workflow for this. Deriving workflow is very easy. You know who the actors are, you know the field engineer, municipal engineer is the other person, executive officer, chairman or admin. So these are the 4 people who will potentially be involved in this whole flow. And what are the different stages also. 1, 2, 3, and 4. There are 4 stages: creation, verification, checking, and admin approval. So these are your 4 stages. And what are the actions also that each person will take. At each stage, somebody can approve or reject something. So municipal engineer can approve or reject at this stage. That is the action. Same thing, approve or reject during this stage, approve or reject during this stage. So this is how you can think about a swim lane diagram. There are also other examples which are there in our developer guide and design guide on core.digit.org. Those are very simple examples. But this is a live example of what we did in one of the projects. So this is a more complicated one, more of a real world one. There are also other workflows that you can check out. Okay, so coming back to the presentation now. Basically, this is how you model your process flow. And from this, you can derive a workflow config. Not all modules need to have workflow. Some things may be fairly straightforward, in which case you don't need to worry about workflow. But still, it's a good practice to kind of model the whole thing and understand how the process flows so that you can design for it in the digital world. Okay. The next piece in Digit is basically identifying master data. Again, master data is not really a Digit concept, right? Any enterprise platform has the concept of master data and master data management. So master data in Digit typically is, they are things that don't change much. They are fairly constant, or maybe they change very slowly. The frequency of change is very less. So this data, again, it's unique per service. Like what are the, depending on the domain, right? Each service, for example, the estimate service has certain master data that we'll have to define. And these are fairly constant. So this is your master data. You need to nail it down first before you start writing business logic. Otherwise, what happens is your business logic, master data, transactional data, everything kind of gets mixed together. And that leads to very messy APIs. Very complicated, messy API. So think about your master data, separate it out from your business transaction logic, and that will lead to much simpler APIs. Also in Digit, we define the roles and access control for these various roles in MDMS, in the master data management service. So when you have done your process flow diagram, you get to know who the actors in the system are. You also start understanding what are the different roles you will need to define in the system. This also becomes master data in Digit. And also think about this master that you are defining. Is it applicable globally, for example, statewide, or is it applicable at a particular boundary level, only at a particular ULB or a city or a district, right? That distinction is very important because you can define these global masters, statewide masters, or you can define, ULB-wise or district-wise masters also. And that's a feature that's available in Digit, but you need to think about it. So if you have a platform that's going to be rolled out across multiple ULBs, there may be certain master data which is applicable uniformly across all the ULBs. And then there may be certain master data which is very specific for that particular ULB. And this is the nature of the work we do with governments, because there is no standardization, in the government. Things change all the time, and we live in a very diverse country with diverse languages, diverse people, where, language, water, everything changes like every 20 kilometers or 50 kilometers or so. So it's very hard to build a system that's very uniform or standard. So Digit comes with a lot of flexibility in terms of at what level you want to define master data and how flexible you want to keep it. So keep this in mind when you think about your modules master data. Next, I just want to show you a sample API specification that might be helpful to just look at. 1 second. Let me just bring that up on the screen. Okay. So we use Open API specifications 3.0 to define all our specs. Again, I'll just keep it to the estimate service, which I just showed you in some of the design screens, also in the PowerPoint also. This is available on DIGITx. I'll share the link also. I'll show you where it is. So if you look at this estimate service and how it has been designed, right? This is one of the simplest services in the Works platform that we have designed. So you can see we have used OAS 3.0 to define the specification. We have used YAML. And typically there are 3 APIs in almost all the services in Digit. Some of them may have a couple extra, but we try to keep it minimal. So we've got these 3 services: create, update, and search. All of them are posts. Okay, and we version our APIs also. Now, if you look at the create API, whoops. Okay, please ignore this. This is just some kind of thing with the spec itself. But basically, you can look at, how the error responses are defined. So you will get a 202 if it's successful. If you pass certain invalid input to create an estimate, that's going to be returned as a 400, and we'll return errors as an array, and we'll give you a message and a description and an error code for what went wrong, right? So this is how it looks like. I'll show you the schema also. Oops. So this is the schema. You will basically pass an estimate request object to the create API. And typically we have a request information which we pass. This is, again, standard stuff. We pass an auth token. We pass a bunch of details, and some of the information gets filled in by the API gateway once the user is authenticated and authorized. Okay, so there is a request info which contains some metadata about the request itself. And then we have the estimate object itself. Again, I'm having some strange problems here, but I'll show you. And then there is also workflow. Basically, what is the workflow action that we need to take? So if you look at estimate request, you can look at this, right? I'll show you the estimate object. So this is the estimate object. And these are the various attributes we are defining for the estimate. Remember that when you model your domain, you will arrive at what are, this is a data entity, right? When you arrive at these entities, you will have an idea about what the attributes of this entity needs to be. This is part of the domain analysis, requirement analysis. So once you have done your requirement analysis, you will know what attributes your entity needs to have. So in this case, we are saying it needs to have an ID, which will be a system generated ID. Read only is true. Please define min and max lengths for all your string attributes. This is to keep it consistent with the database also. And you should also add validations when you actually implement the service. We have a tenant ID. So things like, Punjab or Punjab.Jalandhar, things like that. Estimate number. Each estimate typically has a number, and this is a formatted number that can be generated by the Digit platform IDGen service. So this is an attribute. And each estimate is usually related to a project, right? So you can't have an estimate without a project. So we have a project ID here. You will just store the UUID of the project to which this estimate is related. Proposal date. When was this estimate created or proposed? And then we have a status field, which kind of just stores whether this particular thing is active or not. Again, this is we don't delete anything in Digit. Everything is a soft delete. And this field just tells you whether something has been deleted or not. There is a workflow status attribute. Again, the estimate service has a workflow associated with it. Therefore, we just want to store the latest workflow status, whatever that is, in our entities for easy access. So it can be created, approved, whatever else. Okay. The estimate will have a description, right? Typically, the description will be what are you trying to estimate or build. So this is a string. Then you'll again have a reference number. The reference number is a reference to the actual field, because typically governments have files or dockets, which has some kind of a number. And you want to capture that also because they'll have a file docket and then they are also doing the online system entry. So this is to capture that. There is a description for the estimate that you can add. We have given the maximum length, the patterns, etc., etc. Executing department. This is basically which department has put forth this estimate, who's going to work on it. right? And if you notice this, the description says this is department master data from MDMS. So when I say department, a department has, a name, it will have a code, it will have so many other things, right? Employees of a department, etc. But we are not capturing the whole thing here. We are just capturing the department code here. We'll just say that, okay, department code XYZ, and the details of that department will be defined in your master data. So department is an example of master data, because these departments which are there in a particular ULB or a state will be common across all services. It's not going to change. So that becomes your master data. And once you define it, you will just capture the department code here, right? And you can go fetch the details of that department from the master data management service whenever you need to validate it or do something else with it. We are also defining an address for where this, proposal is going to happen, the estimate or the project is going to happen. And we have a total amount. What is the total amount? 1 lakh or 10 lakhs or whatever it is. And we have details, estimate details, which tells you the breakup of this total amount. How did you arrive at this total amount? Maybe you will have like 10 line items, and the summation of the 10 line items will be here, and the details of all the 10 line items will be available in the estimate details. We also have audit details and additional details. Additional details is a free form field where you can enter some extra things in case it's not captured by the entity itself. Audit details, this is because we have signed audit and we want to capture information on who modified this entity last, when did they do it, when was it created, etc. These are all common entities which are defined in our common contracts. So please make sure you look through our common contracts, which is there in GitHub, so that you can also reuse some of these constructs in your API specs. So again, estimate detail, if you look at it, this gets more into the domain, so I'll just skim over it. We have a schedule of rates ID, which is a unique ID for your line item. We have name, category, description, unit rate, how many number of units of something you will use, like 1,000 bricks, right? And the unit rate is the rate per brick. And then we have something called a unit of measurement and unit of measurement value. Again, these are masters which are defined. Unit of measurements, what are the different units of measurement you'll use in your projects? So you'll just reference a code here, unit of measurement value, all these kinds of things. Again, some of these are very domain specific details, so I won't go into it, but this is a sample spec. So I'll show you where you can also go and see some of these specs. So if you go to github.com e-governments, you can find DIGITx here. So you'll find the DIGITx repo. Here we are trying to consolidate all the specs that we are writing across domains. We are trying to put them here so you can look through these specs. These are some of for the access control service, for billing, for collection, file store, encryption, indexer, everything has a spec, right? So you can look through this. For the works related specs, you can go into domain services, you can go into works, and you will find some of these specs. Some of these specs are a work in progress because we are working on the next version. So they may change a little bit here and there. So you can go through this. This is the estimate service spec, which I just showed you. There are also other specs which you can look at. Okay. So this is where you'll find all these specs. Now going back to the presentation, I'm conscious we have only 5 minutes, so I'll try to wrap up quickly. These are the best practices for API specs. Use OAS 3.0, limit your APIs. Digit typically has create, update, search. Try to keep it the same way. All requests are posts. Put all the parameters of your request in the body, no query parameters. Use common entities which have been defined in the common contracts. Look at digit sample specs, and then keep your APIs simple to understand and extendable. And best practices for master data. Again, we'll put this out in the design guide on our core.digit.org website. Always opt for simple masters. Don't create complicated masters. Maybe your domain does have complex master data, but try to break it down and model it in a simpler way in the digital world. This is again not a digit construct, a general software engineering concept. If you try to model the mess that is there in the real world digitally also, then we are not making anything better, right? So always try and break it down, make it into simple master data. Opt for easy, understandable names for your masters and the various attributes that you define in masters. Define your module-specific masters in separate folders. Put common masters in the common masters folder. Define namespaced masters following digit conventions. Again, a namespaced master is basically you can do x.y, right? So X can be your type, Y can be your subtype. Instead of having a type master, a subtype master, you can put it all in one master and just make it a namespaced master. Again, this is just learnings that we have had from our past implementations. We have also gone through the same journey, made some of these mistakes, and we have realized, especially in the GovTech domain, what is the best way forward. So using namespace masters has reduced complexity for us in our services, both UI and platform. Make sure master data entries have some kind of unique ID, and this identifier is used across services to refer to that master data. Again, simple software engineering principles. Some masters may have effective from and to dates. That is, this data will only be valid for a certain time period. So make sure that you define this in your master data and make sure you validate it when you build your service also. And if you have some master data and you make some changes to it, midway through your project, after it is in production, don't delete master data. Always create a new entry, mark the old one inactive, and create a new one with whatever changes you have so that you don't lose master data. When you have referred to master data code in your database or other services, you don't want to delete it completely. You want to create a new version of it, right? So make sure you do that. Lastly, I do want to leave a couple of minutes for questions. So please volunteer with us if you're interested. Write to us. Sashank and Vibhor can share more information with you on how to volunteer. And finally, thank you for attending this webinar today. Hope it's been of use to you all, and we can take some questions now.
There are a few in the Q&A tab, if you may look at.
Yeah, sure. Vibhor, is the meeting going to end in like 4 minutes?
We have scheduled it till 11, but it's not restricted on webinar. If we have time, we can extend to a couple of minutes.
Sure. Okay. Could you please confirm which branch is stable and latest for this? So Works 0.2 is the latest, Jugal. We are working on Works platform 1.0. That's a work in progress. So V0.2 is the latest at the moment. I see reference adapters. So is this the Government of India's IFMIS? This is not the Government of India's IFMIS. This is the Odisha State Government IFMIS. So that is where we have implemented it. Okay, so that is done. In error, why are you showing successful? Not sure if you are referring to the API spec. API spec is just showing some, sample data based on the examples we have defined. Error will not show successful. Is the endpoint developed in the code validated against API specs, or is it manually inferred? This is a great question, Srikanth. We are trying to make sure that the code validates against the API spec. And whatever we are building, whatever we have built recently, we have tried to do this. In some cases, the API specs that we have published may diverge from the code, but we are in the process of fixing it. But yes, ideally, the code should match the API spec. Will there be more detailed session for setting up master data for new services? Also, we'll have further sessions, Gaurav, upcoming, and we'll keep you posted about that. What am I as a developer getting from Digit? Is it the pre-made API layouts? Ayush, not sure how to answer this. A very broad question. Yeah, you are getting platform services. You are getting a framework where you don't have to build everything from scratch. You can leverage existing, services. You are also getting a framework, right? You get these accelerators or these libraries to develop your UI portals also. So you get a bunch of stuff. So not sure, very broad question. But yeah, you get certain best practices, you get certain sample specs, you get services that you can use, and maybe even code that you can reuse elsewhere. So, okay. So I think that's it. Can I design custom portal or application? You can design custom portal. Yeah, you can feel free to, build a separate UI altogether. We have a platform. We expose services through REST. If you want to build something very different from what we have, yes, please feel free to do that. But if you want to use our UI framework, then we offer the libraries as accelerators. But yeah, you can go ahead and build something completely different. Okay, Siddharth Shekhar asks, data will be stored in Digit server or client server. So this is up to the implementation, basically up to the partner or the client. They can store it wherever they want. So Digit basically provides the platform. Platform has to be implemented on certain, client premises or cloud or whatever it is. So the data belongs to the client. Digit does not store the data. We don't have access to the data. Any schedule on slight detail over services? Ayush will get back to you. Vibhor will probably reach out. If there are any specific, things you want to cover, that will be helpful for us to schedule our upcoming sessions so we can focus on some of those. Please share your feedback and what you want to hear about. Thank you. Are you going to provide a session in DevOps? Yeah, DevOps session, I think Vibhor is scheduled next week, right?
That's on 22nd. That's on 22nd. This time we're going to use it via Azure.
Yeah, this time we are doing deployment on Azure. Last time we did deployment on AWS. So yeah, that's upcoming also. Okay, I think that's it. Like I said, please share your feedback to Vibhor on what you would like to see us talk about, even the format of the sessions. If this is helpful or if some other kind of sessions will be good with more interaction. So let us know and we'll try as best as we can to address your queries. That's it from me.
Thank you, Shubhashini. And for everybody, after this session, there will be a feedback form pop up on your screen. Please do share your feedback. That will help us to design our sessions better. And if you have any expectations, please do share in your feedback form. We'll take those into consideration. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.